Hi, everybody. Good morning. Happy Monday, and happy Halloween. I'm just gonna admit that I've actually never dressed up or gone trick-or-treating in the 23 years that I've lived stateside, but we thought we would switch things up a little bit for Data is Love and talk about some of the really scary things that we hear people say when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and just kind of overall employee well-being. And so I have invited my friend Chris, CEO Who Cares, to join me in this conversation. Chris definitely has a lot of opinions and a lot of thoughts on the state of DEI. So, hey, Chris, where are you?
Good morning, Aparna. Glad to be here.
Chris, so what are some of the things that you are thinking about when you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion in your company?
I think we've seen a huge growth in DEI and employee well-being programs since the murder of George Floyd. There seem to be so many more people of color leading the work.
Are there, Chris? I feel like when I look at the data, even though there is much more conversation about DEI at large in the last 2.5 years, um, I don't know that the action or investment has actually followed suit with the amount of conversation we're having.
Well, it seems like I think companies are hiring more women of color, and people from underrepresented groups. Don't you think?
I think that there definitely is a perception if you spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, as we do, you and I both. We've definitely seen a lot of people changing their jobs, and we see certainly a lot more women of color taking on diversity, equity, inclusion leadership roles. But when you actually break it down by race, what's really interesting is that 80% of diversity executives are still white and predominantly women. I also found it really interesting that the average tenure of a chief diversity officer in large companies is just 3.5 years. And it's half as long as most other executives in the C suite. But really, the average tenure is less than 2 years. It's around 18 months on average. So, yeah, like there are more roles, but they are still predominantly going to white folks. And by the way, like people aren't staying in those jobs very long.
Hmm. Okay, but it's possible those companies are still doing work through consultants and other external partners. I mean, after all, we are spending like $8 billion a year on DEI.
Um, yeah, so that number has been thrown around a lot, right? $8 billion on DEI, but you rarely see a breakdown on where that money is going. And we saw a lot of pledges in the summer of 2020. And yeah, if we chase the numbers, then it's mostly going to marketing. Companies are spending a lot of money marketing to folks from underrepresented groups, marginalized backgrounds. That's where a lot of the money is going. And the other area where money is going is in infrastructure and technology investments. Companies are buying a lot of SaaS platforms to collect data, but they're not actually spending money on things that improve, I would say, the experience for historically underrepresented groups. And, if I think if you ask most Black and Brown people, things haven't really changed in 2.5 years.
Really? Hmm. Okay. I kind of feel that's a little inconsistent with what I hear the leaders saying, other leaders like me. Like even like Tim Cook recently said at Apple, like he knows how important it is to build and maintain a culture where everyone belongs, and they believe they're proud of the progress they've made, and they've kind of created a more inclusive workforce, and they're, seem to be committed to doing more. I mean, I feel that.
Well, have you seen the racial? and gender makeup of his leadership team?
No.
Yeah. So I think that, CEOs are public figures, and I think they say a lot of things that are politically correct and that aren't necessarily followed up by action. And also, like, the iPhone hasn't changed in 5 years. And so I have some questions about whether the employee experience is changing.
Okay, that makes sense. So if the leaders, you know, like me, if we're not on the same page, how do we bring other leaders along and myself included? Like, can the, DEI leaders just put a case study together, like a one pager or a slide that we can use to share with our senior team? Keep everybody engaged and on the same page.
So I totally get that. Look, senior leaders, especially the leaders at the very top, they have a lot on their plate. They're managing a lot of things, and it would be really great. It would be amazing to give folks something that's short and pithy and easy to consume so that we can keep them on the same page with us. But I think that what makes DEI successful is when leaders are fully engaged. And that's not me saying that leaders should be fully engaged. As a woman of color who does this work for a living, Accenture does that as well. So if you look at the research by Accenture, McKinsey, Deloitte, Russell Reynolds, Korn and Ferry, definitively what they're saying is that in organizations that are leading on DE&I and not just with beautiful presentations and words, but where employees are actually feeling differences, people are getting compensated well. In those organizations, DEI is leader led. And I don't know about you, but a one pager on anything isn't going to help me make better decisions and lead. And so I think this is attention, right? People are really busy, they have a lot on their plate, and in order to do well with DEI, they actually have to be a lot more plugged in. And by the way, like, we need more people of color, more queer identifying folks, more folks with disabilities in those leadership roles to advance.
Is there a certain leadership style that I guess would be conducive to being engaged? Like,
Yeah, say more. I mean, are we talking Strength Finder? Are we talking Myers-Briggs?
yeah, I'm just a little curious, but if a one pager isn't going to do it, um, like how could I like shift into a role that isn't just a tack on, not where I'm just like putting my cape on in the morning, my DEI cape, and flying into work.
Ooh, I like it. Your DEI cape. So yeah, what are the leadership styles? And thank you, Catherine, for saying this. Yeah, the work in and out, like, the work needs to happen both in and out of the workplace, right? It's something that we have to be aware of all of the time. There's no cape that we can fly in with. Uh, my One of my absolute favorite frameworks for humans, but I think specifically humans that are making a lot of decisions on behalf of other people, we can call them leaders. They should focus on six things. And these six things, you already know this. I love evidence-based approaches, but these six things, but the Deloitte things are really important, and they've seen are courage, right? Doing well with DEI requires some amount of personal risk taking. And so leaders have to be courageous. And by the way, they have to be ready for their peers to call them out or not invite them, to a happy hour on their yacht. It requires commitment. It requires staying the course even when things get really hard, and they do all of the time. It requires collaboration. I don't think that you can do this work in a silo or make decisions in a silo. That's not how any of us does our best work. It requires cultural intelligence, and cultural intelligence, partly stems from lived experience. And so those of us that have lived, in many different countries, or are immigrants or people of color, like, we have these identities. Some of our cultural intelligence is built in because of how we've had to navigate the world. But I do think that just the same way in which leaders are learning cultural norms so that when they go to meet another CEO in Japan, they know what the norms are there, right? They remember to take their shoes off, versus going to a dinner in the UK, right? What are the cultural norms there? So just like they're trained on those things, I think that they need to have some cultural intelligence. I would say curiosity is a really important value, and great leaders will always be the ones that ask their employees and people that work around them, why do you think this way? What leads you to this conclusion? Why, what is feeding into this recommendation? And I think the last one, and it's one that seems to be the Achilles heel for most people, is this concept of cognizance. Uh, Everybody has biases. All of us have biases, right? I have a really particular bias around Halloween, which is why I've never indulged in the trick-or-treating or the costumes or the mass consumption of candy. But bias is part and parcel of our lives. And so great leaders are aware of what their biases are and are actively working on reducing them.
Okay. Going back to something you said a little earlier, it sounds like a lot of the work of DEI is getting more women and people of color and other groups into leadership roles. So does that mean that kind of like DEI initiatives lead to reverse discrimination? Like, shouldn't we want to promote people based on their merit and, what they bring to the table?
That's a great question. I think in an ideal world, we absolutely want to promote people on the basis of merit and what they bring to the table. I would love to see that world, but this idea of reverse discrimination is really interesting. And, I think a lot of people will say that asking for equity makes people who've enjoyed the benefits of, being like, or having a privileged identity, feels oppressive. It feels like discrimination. I think certainly, um, I have people asking me all of the time whether my recommendation is they fire all of the white folks in a leadership role and replace them with non-white people, or replace them with women, or folks that are queer. And I don't know that it's that simple. We absolutely need more people of color. And in fact, I would say we need people that are representative of, like, where we live and work and who our customers are. And so if the majority of my customers are women and my leadership team is pretty male, are they well positioned to make decisions around products and services for women? Wouldn't it be great to actually have people who are representative of the customer base be in leadership roles? I think that instinctively or theoretically, we would say, yes, absolutely. But then when it comes down to the brass tacks of running a company, we tend to hire people and promote people that look like us. And so is it reverse discrimination? Well, I would never say that it's reverse discrimination. I think it's feeling uncomfortable. I think it's having your skills be called into question. And look, we already talked about, like, the qualities of a great leader: cognizance, courage, commitment, cultural intelligence, curiosity. I think if you're using those, then you need to understand that you probably should be making room at the table for people that look different than you.
So it feels like I should be spending a little bit more time on developing a new leadership style that incorporates all those traits. I can
I mean,
see.
you could, and look, and like you're gonna make a hella money doing it too, because we know that companies that are more diverse, teams that are more collaborative, when there is gender, racial, class diversity on leadership teams, those companies are far more profitable. They just are.
Right. Well, I feel like, I've seen a lot of companies offering more flexible work schedules and better benefits. I know my company is, we have free blood on Fridays. So I feel like, we're headed in the right direction with DEI.
I think that you're right in noticing that over the last 2.5 years, we've definitely seen companies offer workers the things they need to be successful. Certainly, certainly, being in a global pandemic created room for hybrid remote work for a lot of people. By the way, it's a thing that people with disabilities have been asking for a very long time. They've been asking for that. They've been asking for that specific kind of flexibility for a really long time. But we had to be in a global pandemic for companies to say, yeah, you don't have to be on the road every week, or you certainly don't have to be in the office every single day to do your job well. And all of us have done an incredible job during this time. So, yeah, there have been some shifts, right? But I think that this summer, I think we have entered a new place that to me seems a little bit scary. And I'm definitely not the only one that's noticed that a lot of companies are rolling back, for instance, their paid family and medical leave benefits that have an outsized impact specifically on birthing and caregiving people, which in many instances, it's women, right? Not giving people who are giving birth or welcoming a new child into their family any paid time off. We're noticing some cuts to medical benefits. We're noticing that in states that are conservative and, like, are trying to take away rights of queer and trans folks, that they're taking away some of those gender affirming care policies away. They're taking that away. And so, you know, that's happening. But I think the thing that I have been really paying attention to is compensation. And Chris, I don't know if you've noticed this, because somebody is probably buying groceries for you, but the rest of us that buy our own groceries, we've definitely noticed how much more expensive everything has gotten. And compensation isn't keeping up with the cost of living. And certainly, the federal minimum wage hasn't changed in 20 years. In 20 years. When I was in high school 20 years ago, gas used to be like $1 a gallon. You would literally take like $3 to the gas station and fill up like your car in high school. That was pretty common. And gas is $6 a gallon right now, here in the Pacific Northwest. And so, how, I mean, forget paid leave, forget better healthcare. How about paying people enough so that they don't have to make decisions about whether to spend on groceries or heating, which is a very real decision. Like 50% or more of Americans are making, and we're coming into the winter season. So that gets to be even a harder decision for so many.
So I hear what you're saying, but it feels like, running the company, financial health is actually very important
Yeah.
to the company to make sure there is a company to employ people. And we are headed into a
Mm.
recession. So it seems like perhaps making, bigger investments or in DEI isn't quite the best use of our company dollars right now.
Oh, well, here's the thing. Do you remember what happened in March of 2020?
Yes.
Yeah,
I was on
right.
vacation and Transylvania.
So in the March of 2020, companies were shutting down offices, and we were in the early days of the pandemic. And who were the first people to get laid off and furloughed? In most organizations, it was people in DEI roles. And like we're talking about still a pretty small subset of companies that had that function or that had people in that role. But we were, people that were in learning and development, people that were in different parts of, employee experience. They were the ones that were getting furloughed. And 2 months later, after the murder of George Floyd, companies realized that they didn't actually have the personnel with the skills and the expertise to help navigate through that really challenging moment. And a lot of them, like had to recall those employees. Some of them had already moved on to other jobs, which created some additional challenges. So I think that, yeah, fiscal responsibility, of course, is important, but not investing in a people function at a time when people are not making enough money to pay their bills, when people are really stressed. We have been in this really intense stress cycle for 2.5 years. 2.5 years of working from home and like figuring out how to manage your kiddos, and maybe your family members have gotten sick, and climate change is so intense and we're feeling it in so many different places of the world. Is this the right time? Is this the right time to pull back from investing in what helps your people stay connected to the company? I would say no. I would say no. Now, we could have a different conversation about shareholders and profitability, but in the long term, pulling back now is going to have some, I would say, some pretty big financial implications for most companies.
Okay. All right. But then earlier we talked about me not just taking my DEI cape and putting it on and taking it off. It's more like DEI is actually everyone's job, to make it work. So why do we actually need people in those jobs then?
Oh, why indeed? I definitely want to amplify Ayana's comments. Financial investments during times of difficulty send a really clear message, particularly to people from marginalized or underestimated, underrepresented communities. And so, want to highlight that. Look, budgets are moral documents. Budgets show what our priorities are. And if anybody is listening, right, any of your CEO friends that are tuning in today, if they are perhaps aggrieved by our country, the US is spending on military over everything else, then that's the analogy that I would offer you is if we find it really bizarre that we're spending more money on the military than every other social benefit put together, including education and health and social security and meal programs and arts, then yeah, then in our companies we have to make different choices. Oof. All
Hmm.
right. Catherine says the message is that the choice between food and heat is not important too. You want to fill in the blanks?
The CEO that cares?
Oof, to the CEO that cares. I will just say that at the start of the pandemic, one of the scary things that I heard from a CEO, this is, following the murder of George Floyd, and there were a lot of forest fires. If you remember, the summer of 2020 was pretty ugly here on the West Coast. Somebody in a C-suite role said to me, Aparna, I too am a climate refugee, as they were flying on their private jet to their second home in Montana. And I had to work really hard on managing my affect and not, either make my cringy face or, just shut down my computer. So yeah, it comes back to the leadership styles, cognizance, cultural intelligence. Okay, so you said if DEI is everybody's job, then why do we need people in those jobs? Why is it? So let me ask you this. Fiscal responsibility is everybody's job. Then why do you have a chief financial officer and accountants in your company?
Yeah, division of labor and specialization is important, because all pieces of the machine work together, or all people in the company have to work together to achieve the goals.
That's right.
So,
yeah. And we're auditing all kinds of things, right? We're in any company, we're auditing and making sure that people are not putting false charges on reimbursement forms, people are not overspending, right? We have budgets at the department level, the sub-org level.
that kind of brings up another point then, that with DEI that I've experienced is, there's not a lot of, in the CFO will give me numbers and spreadsheets and charts, and I can track it.
Yeah.
DEI, I get a lot of questions and answers. None of it's really data driven. So, I don't have a dashboard to find out what's happening and what's effective.
Yeah, you're right. And if you have a chief financial officer, which you do, you know that you're sitting down on a weekly, monthly basis and reviewing financials with them constantly, right? Like you're keeping tabs on what's happening with respect to money in the organization. And I think that, yeah, you're right. As a field, we have done a real disservice to not be grounded in a more data informed approach. Now, I'm just going to ask you, what if you did have access to data and your data showed you that you're not paying queer folks the same as you are folks that are straight? What about, well, Ayana thinks that the data is out there. What if the data showed you that, women of color in the organization are having a really poor experience? What would you do with that?
I think actually being able to see that data in a format that I see everything else I use to run the business would be very illuminating, and I could take action on it, because then I could put policies in place and actually measure if there's a change, and what that change is, and is it actually making progress.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love Berthine's comment in the chat. Accountability. Accountability. DEI officers should be working closely with a CFO. Absolutely. So I think that what would help CEOs or decision makers at large is to be able to see, look, the data shows us that women of color are having not a very favorable experience in the organization. And by the way, that they're more expensive to hire, possibly because our company doesn't actually have big networks to pull from, and they leave sooner. So there's a very real cost associated with the turnover. But also, what is if you were going to project, which CFOs do all the time, what if your projections show you that when women of color leave your organization 2 years down the road or 3 years down the road, the products that you're launching are not attractive to certain audiences. So there's some lost revenue. And I think for me, one of the places that I've seen that in a pretty intense way is honestly with like makeup brands. I remember walking into a Nordstrom in my 20s and wanted to get matched for foundation, and it was, let's just say that I too would have looked like Dracula if I had made that purchase. And the rise of Fenty gives us so much energy. I mean, it's such a beautiful, inclusive brand. You are not going to look really bizarre or orange with their products. And I love how they show up in the world. I love that. And what it's done is what's like really opened the door for all of these other inclusive makeup brands. And we like now have access to more brands just in the last, I think, 5 years than I think for the 50 years before that. And guess what? Most Black and brown women are no longer standing at a makeup counter in Nordstrom anymore, because we know that we have better choices, more responsive, more inclusive choices. And so, absolutely, I think that using data to be able to project and align with business outcomes is so important. And that's my wish really for everybody. So, Chris, I'm curious, what would you do differently? What would you do differently leaving this conversation? What choices would you make?
I think I'd definitely look at incorporating the cape into my being. Maybe make it my wings. To look at a leadership style that is inclusive, but then also at the same time looking at the data. So, making it a more science-backed position within the company that is maybe, if there's ways to quantify the qualitative experience so that I can have a dashboard and that I plug in the C team, the C-suite, so that we can all work together. And like you said, identify possibly new products. It definitely would probably help with retention. But that, even the customer base, the people running the company are the people who we're marketing, our target markets. So I can definitely see the alignment there.
All right. So I want to amplify one last voice before we wrap up for the day and let you get on with your important CEO business.
The sunlight's coming out, so I need to head back to my coffin soon. So
is what Catherine is saying. Numbers can tell a really great story, and don't wait for the numbers to do the right things. I think if there is anything that makes equity and inclusion happen in an organization, right, where diversity is not just aspirational, we see it around us, it is listening and believing what your employees are telling you, especially your people from historically underrepresented groups. So don't discount what they have to say about their experience. And God bless Fenty and God bless Rihanna for being on this earth and showing us the way. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. As you watch this live stream again, go ahead and put your thoughts in the comments below so that we can learn from each other and we can better resource each other. Have a great week ahead and happy Halloween.